Don't want to take too much of our time tonight, and I'm going to start the recording. Hello, everyone. Again, this is Dr. David, and I'm here with a very special guest, Michael Gurian. I'm going to get his bio out really quickly if I can find it. All right. Michael Gurian is a family therapist, corporate consultant, and lecturer, and the New York Times best-selling author of 25 books published in 21 languages. The Gurian Institute, which he co-founded, conducts research internationally, launches pilot programs, and trains professionals. He has been called the people's philosopher for his ability to bring together people's ordinary lives and scientific ideas. He has pioneered efforts to bring neurobiology and brain research into homes, schools, corporations, and public policy. A number of his books have sparked national debate, including The Wonder of Girls, The Wonder of Boys, Boys and Girls Learn Differently. That's the one I read or listened to. The Minds of Boys and Leadership and the Sexes, which we'll be talking about tonight. I'm going to skip to the bottom. Michael's work has been featured in various media, including the New York Times, the Washington Post, USA Today, Newsweek, Time Magazine, People Magazine, Reader's Digest, the Wall Street Journal, Forbes Magazine, Parenting, Good Housekeeping, Red Book, and on the Today Show, Good Morning America, CNN, PBS, and National Public Radio. And now, Building Strength webinars. How about that? Michael, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. We are honored to have you on, and I'm sure we'll be going back and forth as you talk, because as I've seen the slides, I know you have lots of interesting things for us to share. So thank you again for doing this, and over to you.
Oh, thank you so much, David. It's really a pleasure. I just love your mission, and I hope that everyone listening will enjoy. I've certainly enjoyed being a part of Building Strength webinar series. You should see the screen, and on there is Leadership and the Sexes, which is a book that, as David was mentioning, is quite a bit about the workplace and about relationships between men and women in the workplace and how to maximize those at all levels, senior leader levels, management, and so on. I also put a little note at the bottom of the slide of another book if you're more interested in relationships, and that's got a little star there, What Could He Be Thinking? And that one, even though it has the quite pop title, What Could He Be Thinking, it's actually about both men and women, and it helps understand both the male and female brain in relationships, so in romantic relationship and marriage. I'm going to actually give information as I look at the subtitle line is The Fascinating Differences Between Women and Men, and I'm going to look at also applications that have to do with boys and girls, so not just relationships, but also boys and girls. And some of these boys and girls learn differently David referred to, and that's for that helps teachers and parents to understand this to apply in schools. And I'll give a few examples of those. Minds of Boys, Wonder of Girls, Nurture the Nature. So these are some of what I'm going to say. I'm going to try to pack a lot of great stuff into this hour and a half. And these are references to go if you enjoy this and you want to go deeper into particular populations involving adults or kids. Okay, so my area of study has been, and I've been doing this, I started trying to figure this out about 25 years ago when I was in graduate school. And when I was in graduate school, we were talking a lot about gender roles at that time. So that's in the 80s. There wasn't much talk about gender, and the dialogue about gender roles was really great dialogue because we were obviously a culture and a world in transition regarding gender roles. But I also had noticed, because I lived quite a bit overseas as a kid, I had noticed that there seemed to be behavior patterns and approaches and perspectives that seemed to be very quote-unquote male and very quote-unquote female, and they didn't have to do necessarily with gender roles. They had to do with the sort of hidden signals that we sent each other, and I didn't know much about it. I didn't know, I was 25 years old. What did I know? Very little. But I thought there's something here, and no one's talking about it, and there was no discussion of gender in the brain. So I set out to try to figure out who was doing it, because I'm a therapist. I'm not a primary scientist. I'm a therapist. And there was quite a bit of primary studies, brain scan studies. There was a lot going on then, but no internet then, so it had hard to track it all down. But it took some time. And then my wife and I went to Turkey to teach for 2 years, and so I took my research on urban American boy, girl, male, female. I took that and I compared it, and I went out to villages in Turkey, in eastern Turkey, which are a completely different culture than, let's say, the streets of Manhattan, and compared. And sure enough, it did appear that these behavior patterns were robust, and that males and females, you know, worldwide seem to be looking at certain patterns. And I wanted to know then, okay, what do we do? How do we use this information? So the quotes I have here, on the left you have a new science-based approach to gender challenges in business, and that's definitely the leadership and the sexist side, looking at how to apply this in business. And the other quote is from a wonderful scientist: human evolution has created 2 different types of brains, male and female, designed for equally intelligent behavior. And of course, that's the absolute starting point. There's nothing you'll hear tonight or you'll read in any of my work that says either male or female are superior or inferior. You know, I feel like we sort of moved beyond that about 30 years ago. What I'm interested in are practical strategies and insights that grow from understanding that we do have somewhat different brain types, and there is a broad spectrum for these, and there are, you know, more than 6 billion people on this earth, so that means there's more than 3 billion ways to have a male brain and more than 3 billion ways to have a female brain. So obviously great variety. But also gender is really a big part of who we are. And we are equally intelligent, we're just a little different. Okay, so to have some fun, I've listed things here. I'll do men first and then women that you may have noticed in your life, and that have connections to some of the brain stuff I'll go over with you. So some quote-unquote mysterious behaviors for men. I've collected this from workplaces and relationships. So have you noticed that males tend to jiggle a leg or tap the table or need to move around the room more than females do? Have you noticed that, and this is especially true in the workplace, that guys take time to tell jokes? And while certainly women tell jokes, if you sort of take a yellow pad out, and anything I say tonight, if you over the next 30 days, just for fun, you know, write on your list, create columns for this, male and female, and write how much this goes on. And if you happen to be in a workplace, there's a place where you get a lot of people, you should notice that more males will spend more time making jokes and trying to make other people laugh as a specific way of communicating. Another one is that in meetings, especially if they go on long, or if you're in a relationship and there's a long conversation, it might appear that the guy is starting to get kind of quote-unquote out of it, not listening or zoning out. The eyes might glaze somewhat. And you see this more in males than females. And you also might notice, and of course there will always be exceptions to everything I'm saying here depending on a situation, but you also might notice that in meetings, some men will talk over or interrupt someone else who's talking. They seem to get impatient more quickly with the conversation, and so they might talk over or interrupt. You might also notice that guys seem to want to cut to the chase and see the data, and a lot of explanation doesn't move them as much as the data does. So these are just a few things you might notice, and if you happen to want to write them down and check them out for 30 days and compare them to the women around you, see how many of those will apply. Okay, so some different behaviors from women. You might notice that that in a meeting, people are taking notes, and when the meeting gets quite boring, you might notice that some of the women are still taking notes, even though the meeting is quite boring. And if you go into a school, the Gurian Institute has 2 divisions. We have the corporate division, which works in companies and firms, and then we have the education division, and we go into schools and train teachers and do observation and programs in schools. And so this is something that we've found that girls will tend, when the teacher gets boring, girls will still tend to be taking notes, whereas most of the boys in the classroom will start zoning out and stop taking notes. So even when bored, and I'm going to show you, by the way, I'm going to show you some SPECT scans later that show you why potentially this is going on in the brain. You may notice also that women and girls will tend to use more sensorial or emotive words. So these are words that, so sensorial is having to do with color and having to do with what things feel like to the touch, right? And hearing. Female brain, girls, women tend to hear more anyway than boys and men do. So they tend to use more words around that. They also may tend to use more emotive words, so words that are about the emotions and the reactions to the emotions. And we'll talk a bit about how there's more connectivity in girls and women's brains to the centers of the brain that do sensorial and emotive tasks. Another thing you might notice is, and there will be exceptions to this because obviously there are some very aggressive women, but you might notice that in a large group, you might notice that girls and women don't try to get called on quite as much. And one of the things we do in corporations is help train women to make sure to get called on, make sure to self-promote, because often we find that they're not doing it as much as they need to. You might also find that women ask more open-ended questions. This is a great one if you want to try this out in your 30-day study. Watch this, especially in a place where you have a lot of men and women, and watch how often women will end sentences with, don't you think, or what do you think, which is a really neat way of bonding, but it can often appear to others that it doesn't show strength. It doesn't look like she knows what she's talking about because she's asking you what you think, whereas it could well be that there's something else going on here. So these are just a few things you might notice. Well, these things that I've selected for you there, kind of tip of the iceberg for our time tonight, but some of these things are set up before our babies are born. And sometimes this comes as a shock to folks. I think less so now in the year 2011, but you know, in 1985, this came as quite a shock. Now I think everyone sort of knows, it's common sense that there's something going on in the brain, something going on that's male and that's female. Well, what could be going on? Well, what we believe we know now is that it's a combination of nature and nurture. So if any of you, like myself, when you were back in school, were taught that, well, everything that has to do with your maleness and femaleness is socialized, so it just really matters how you're brought up, and that's what creates your gender. That's been disproven. I mean, I think it's really tough for anyone to prove that's true now, and mainly because I think of a lot of this research that shows that some of these behavior patterns, like the jiggling of the leg for the guys, or the women taking notes more, even if they're bored, those go on all over the world, and the culture really doesn't matter. So those things are what we call transcultural, and so culture is obviously a huge deal in gender roles. It's huge. I mean, obviously, some cultures don't even allow girls to go to school. So that's where culture is a huge deal. But these things that we're talking about here that can get misread between men and women in relationships, at work, these things, some of this is set up in utero. And so there are 3 steps. The first step for setting up some of this gender are chromosome markers. So the way this works is there are chromosome markers on the X and the Y chromosome, and obviously if you're female, you're going to be generally XX. If you're male, you're going to be XY. So on these chromosomes are markers. And on the Y chromosome, around 5 to 6 months in utero, so that is to say in a baby boy, 5 to 6 months after conception, these markers kick in, and they tell the mom system, who's carrying the child, this is not an XX, this is an XY. So we must differentiate this child, which is a male, we must differentiate from the female. So XY needs to be differentiated from XX, and these markers are on the Y chromosome. So over a period of about 4.5, 5 months, from around that 6-week period to around 5 to 6 months in utero, both babies are getting shots and hits of hormones in utero while carried by the mom. Both are getting them, and we both get each other's hormones. And this is true all through life. I'm male, but I have estrogen, and so on. So it's true all through life. But you get differing degrees. And this is crucial. Males get about 10 to 20 times more testosterone through the system. And this starts in utero, and it happens between around 6 weeks to 6 months. So that's one of the key things that the chromosome markers on the Y chromosome are telling the system to do. And the way that's easily accomplished is that the system is told this Y baby needs to drop testicles. We need to have testicles on this boy. So those start to drop at around that 6-week period into 2 months, and they are shooting testosterone through that system. And that helps to differentiate both the body of the male and the brain of the male. And then step 3 is nurture and socialization. The baby is born later at around 9 months. The baby's born and enters a culture, and that culture says, you know, you're male, you're female, here's what we want you to do, or here's what we think males are, here's what we think females are. So that's a step 3. And in 1985, that was the step 1. But we now know that that's a step 3. The chromosome markers and the in utero development happens, and then comes the nurture and socialization. And we know of now just over 100 differences in the way the male and female brain work and the way they're set up. So structural, chemical, and functional differences, just over 100. And so this is crucial because a lot of these are being set in step 1 and step 2. And it's important to talk about this because people will say, but wait a minute, all the brain scientists are telling us that everything's plastic. There's high plasticity for everything. So why wouldn't gender be that? Wouldn't you be able to change the gender on the brain of the male or the female based on how you raise the kid? Because it should be plastic. And for instance, we know that if you eat a certain way and you eat blueberries and you eat more protein, we can, as Daniel Amen has said very wisely, you can do some rewiring of the brain, change your brain, change your life. We can do these things and we can become healthier people. So why wouldn't that plasticity apply to gender? And that's a really logical question. However, there are certain things that are being set, and they're being set early, before the child is born. And those things have low plasticity. So some of the health markers that are attached to eating blueberries or eating protein and so on, some of those will have high plasticity. Those are very changeable in the brain. But things like gender and things like personality, are you an introvert, are you an extrovert, those sorts of things have low plasticity. They're tough to change. And that's why you may have found, especially if you're listening and you have raised kids, and you have raised both your boys and girls exactly the same way, based on however you wanted them to be raised, and yet now here they are, both 22 and 25, and you say to yourself, well, yeah, that boy is, he's a wonderful guy, but yeah, he's kind of male, and she's a wonderful young woman, but kind of female. And you're thinking, well, what do I mean by that? Well, you have an instinct that, I believe, you have an instinct that something was going on this whole time, and that you did raise both these kids the same, and yet, there's certain maleness and femaleness. So some of that, obviously, I would argue, goes back to these differences that we can see on the brain, and the brain is. So I'm arguing, and I have been for quite a while, that the brain is preset for gender, and that gender roles can be changed, but it's preset for gender. And again, by gender, we mean 3 billion ways to be male and 3 billion ways to be female. And so therefore, it's a gender spectrum. And I'm actually going to show you scans in a little while, brain scans, that will help you see the spectrum. And so what we do is we're looking at lifelong refinement of gender leadership. So that is to say, we're constantly refining our skills and working with each other. And we shouldn't be too surprised if there are certain things that are wonderfully male and wonderfully female and that don't change a heck of a lot. So this shows areas of gender difference throughout the brain, and these are just a few. And I hope you'll get intrigued by this tonight, and that you'll pursue this through resources. If you're interested in adults, look at Leadership in the Sexes. At the end of Leadership in the Sexes, you'll find just under 100 of these primary brain research and brain chemistry research studies, just under 100. So you can go check them yourself. Primary research studies that are showing the differences between male and female brain in various areas. And here are just a few. Obviously, I won't go through all of them with you, but these are just a few. And just so you know, this is covering a lot. The amygdala you're seeing there on the right of your screen there, the word toward the bottom, that's an emotion center, aggression, anger center. I mean, that's an important part of the brain where there are differences. The hippocampus right next to it is a memory center. And there are profound differences in the ways that males and females remember things and use their memory. Again, you can try this at home. One fun way I think you can try this if you look at memory is this happens sort of constantly. If you are a woman listening to this and you're in a relationship with a man, at the end of a long work day, after he has stopped by the grocery store, let's say, to pick something up, and now at 6 or 7 p.m. he comes in and you start talking to him, and he says, oh, I saw Judy and John, our friends at the grocery store. And then you say, oh, yeah, okay, what'd they say? And he may get semi-blank. And he may say, well, they talked about the kids. The kids are good. And you may keep trying to get detail out of him, and he may not remember. Well, it's a difference. And if that had been transposed, and if it was I, a man, asking my wife after she walked in, oh, what did they say? She may well remember quite a bit to tell me. Also, if you get in arguments, you'll see some of this. Let's say you're a male-female couple, and you get in an argument about something, and generally, she, the female, is more likely to be able to string a set of memories that go back 10, 20, 25 years. Well, you did that same thing 5 years ago when we were sitting at such and such a restaurant, and you said that same thing 10 years ago when we were doing such and such. And generally, it's much harder for guys to do that. We don't have that string, that memory string of these emotive and sensorial experiences that happened 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago that match with the emotional experience we're having right now. So there's just a few examples of it that you can try and see if that works in your relationship. You should generally find that. So these are differences all through, as you can see, also the top of the brain, the frontal lobe, prefrontal lobe, parietal, temporal, occipital, all these areas that handle what we hear, what we see, the words we use, lots of differences. All right, so let's feature a few of them. So guys, one thing that when we said that about the jiggling of the leg and the needing to move around, well, we now know that there's greater activity in the cerebellum, which is the doing center. It's sort of a center of the brain where the commands to do things flood through there and then go down into the brainstem and into the body, and vice versa, back up into the brain. So males tend to have a more active doing center, and that obviously can apply to all sorts of things. It can apply to males needing to move around in a meeting. It can apply to males getting tired of talk at a certain point and wanting to go do. It can also have a sort of convex mirror side, and we see this with a lot of our young men nowadays, where they're not doing anything, and they're just sitting around. And actually, it's very worrisome. The Minds of Boys is one of my books that covers this quite a bit. Why are they unmotivated? Why aren't they doing more? Well, all through their development, males tend to need to be moved toward doing, toward finding purpose in what they do, and performing and finding meaning in what they do and what they accomplish. And quite often, a lot of our young males are not being given that in their families, in their schools. They're being bored and distracted, but they're not really doing things that we would consider sacred or purposeful or meaningful. And we're finding that they're getting to be 20 or 25 and 30, and they're just not maturing. So that's a convex mirror. There's a lot of depth that comes from knowing that males really need to and want to process a lot through doing centers. Okay, another thing you find in males is more reliance on what are called spatial mechanicals and visual graphics. And so I'm going to explain what that means. I'm going to tell kind of a funny story. This one's also in the Minds of Boys that I think you'll recognize. And this, by the way, this stuff is set up during the in utero testosterone surges that hit the brain from around 6 weeks through to 6 months. One of the things that the testosterone does in the male brain is overlay on the right side of the male brain. It overlays the verbal centers that would be in the female brain. It overlays these spatial mechanical and visual graphic centers so that when your baby is born, if your baby is male, that baby is doing words, verbal stuff. You see my little prompt there, less verbal. Males do tend to be less verbal. They do tend to read, write, and speak less. And if they speak more, they will tend to read and write less. So if you look at women and men and you compare them in groups of hundreds, the number of words that women or girls read, write, and speak, and you compare that to the number of words that men read, write, and speak, so that is to say produce words, you find that women produce more. Even though in one of those three categories, like speaking, you might find that a guy talks all the time, but he may not read and write as much. So that less verbal, one of the reasons that happens is because in the female brain, in your baby girls, they're going to do their verbals on both sides of the brain. So that's really important. Your girls are doing, and the women listening to this, you're listening to my words, processing them on both sides of your brain. And when you speak and you remember sensorial things and you remember emotional things and all the wonder of the female brain, a lot of which is tied to words, a lot of that is because you did not get the overlay, you did not get the hits of testosterone in utero that overlaid this other stuff, what we call spatial mechanicals and visual graphics, onto the right side. You kept your verbals on the right side, so you're doing it on both sides. But males, the baby boys, when they come out, they got those hits of testosterone. And so they are not doing these verbals on the right. They are doing spatial mechanicals and visual graphics. So let me give this little funny story illustration on the spatial mechanicals. There's a little story of these 13-year-old boys, and a guy's looking back at when he was 13, and he says, my best friends and I had a game we loved to do. We'd love to go down into our basement. We would turn the light off, and we loved to hit each other with darts. So these are metal-pointed darts, and these 13-year-olds in the pitch dark are throwing these darts at each other and trying to hit each other. And he tells the story that, well, you know, we're all ducking, we're all at risk, we're hiding, we're throwing our darts. And one time we heard a guy yell, "Ow!" So we, of course, turned on the lights, and we saw that he had a dart dangling from his cheek just below his eye. And the question I always ask people, and I'm asking it to you, and I know you can't answer me right now, but think about this. Did these boys, once they saw this metal-pointed dart sticking out of the skin just below the eye, did these 5 best friends say, "Oh, we must stop this game. We should never do this again"? Well, when I ask this of audiences, you know, excuse me, they generally say, "Oh no, they kept playing that game." And especially if you're a mom who has raised boys, or you're a man who used to be a boy, or you're raising boys, you know, you sort of recognize that this is very guyish, very boyish. We love to throw things at each other. And if you try anywhere in the world and you say, well, I want to find 5 girls at 13 who really like each other, who are best friends, and I want to see where these 5 girls are who, to show their love for each other, show their care for each other, to be friends, they would go into a dark basement and they would throw metal-pointed darts at each other. And so I've asked this question of, I don't know, probably 10 or 20,000 people, and none of us have been able to think of where those 5 girls are. No matter the culture, you don't tend to see girls who show their affection for each other, their love of each other, their care for each other, their camaraderie, their bonding, by throwing these objects constantly at each other. But no matter where you go in the world, and I found this in Eastern Turkey, as I was mentioning, no matter where you go in the world, you see that guys do tend to throw things at each other, or they tend to bounce balls, you know, themselves. They tend to toss things up in the air themselves. And this is spatial mechanical. What they're doing is they're moving objects around in space. And space here obviously means the space around them. We don't necessarily mean outer space. We mean the space around them. And so, like in Leadership in the Sexes, we talk about the videotape of Wall Street and of guys who, while they're in the middle of the stress of trading, are throwing wadded up pieces of paper at each other, or little Nerf balls at each other to keep themselves going. And there's a videotape of a woman walking through that saying, "Grow up." You know, she's saying to these guys, "Stop doing that, grow up." But she doesn't realize that actually their brains are saying, "Do this. This is really helpful for our brain because it excites the right side of my brain." Because words do not excite that side of my brain. Don't get it moving. But throwing these objects do. And it is attached also for guys to how we care about each other That's why I keep mentioning the guys like each other do this. They throw metal-pointed darts at each other. They don't hate each other. They like each other. Well, this is a way that they bond and connect through throwing these objects back and forth. So the other side of spatial mechanical is, well, let me put in parentheses, a way you can test this, just to test this out for yourself, beyond these examples I gave, is go to a daycare and look at the boys and girls at the daycare and give dolls to the boys and give dolls to the girls. And really, anyone can do this experiment. It was done for over a period of 10, 15 years all over the world, and results are very similar. Give dolls to both sexes and see what they do with it. And obviously, they're kids. There's going to be a lot of variety, but one pattern you're going to find is that the guys will tend to pull the heads off these dolls. They'll toss the dolls up in the air. They'll bang the dolls together. And so they'll use the dolls as these physical spatial objects to make into toys. And they don't see the doll as a human being to connect with and verbalize with. They see the doll as just an object to throw up into space or move around in space or pull apart and look inside it. The girls, most of the time, there will always be exceptions, but you're going to mostly find that sure, there's going to be a girl who's going to throw it up in the air, but generally you'll find that they'll start talking to the doll, and they'll start caressing the doll's hair or doing something sensorial with the doll. So their brains are getting more of a sensorial hit from the doll, and they're getting more of a need to verbalize and make it into a verbalizing object, an object that they would talk to and talk bondingly and caringly for and with, whereas the guys will bond to it by tossing it around. So that's one you can do that actually is very interesting and that can be sort of life-changing to see how deep this goes. And you can do this, some of those things from around the world. Any culture that you're in, you can do this. And this is done in all cultures. Okay, another piece is the visual graphic. When the testosterone hits the system on the right side of the male brain, it overlays visual graphic centers as well. So visual graphic means pictures, right? It means things that are visual as opposed to things that are words. And we've done a lot of application of this in schools. And if you're listening and you happen to have a boy who has trouble doing writing, or you know he's having some trouble in school, this is something to think about. And Minds of Boys and Strategies for Teaching Boys and Girls Learn Differently. These books will give you hundreds of these strategies, but here's one that we've used with a lot of success in schools. These guys who stare at the blank page and can't figure out what to write, if you give them a storyboard or give them color crayons like 3rd, 4th grade and tell them to draw what they're trying to write, they'll be able to draw it relatively quickly. So if the assignment is, you know, write what you did over the weekend, and that's your Monday morning writing assignment in 4th grade, 5, 6 of those boys in that classroom are going to have trouble because, remember, they don't have as many verbal centers over here. They're spatial, and their graphic centers are getting stimulated, but they aren't allowed to draw. They're supposed to write. So it's a disconnect for them. Their brains are not set up for that, these guys. And especially the more male these guys are on the brain spectrum. Remember, we said there are 6 billion people, so there's this broad brain spectrum. Well, some guys are very verbal. They're toward the middle of the spectrum, like I am. They're more toward the female side. But a lot of guys are not. They're very male-male, we would say. Well, those are going to be especially the guys who need the visual graphic. And once we start letting them draw and saying to them, go ahead and draw what you did over the weekend, well, now they draw it. And then when they write an hour later, they write what they drew. And they write long papers, whereas before they were writing one paragraph. So that's an immediate application that I think everyone can think about and use. And of course, in the workplace, it's very important when we're doing meetings that we don't use too many words, as I'll say in a little while, and we use graphics, especially with guys who are clearly not that verbal. We've got to use pictures because that's what stimulates them. So another feature of the male brain is we have more gray matter. We have around 6 to 7 times more gray matter than girls and women do. And gray matter it localizes brain activity. So when we're given a task, we tend to do that task in our gray matter. We do it in a particular part of the brain. And as we'll look at in a moment, women have more white matter. So they spread that more throughout the brain. Okay, and the last thing I'll say on males is we have less cingulate gyrus activity. So that's one of those brain centers. And it's a concentration center. So males will tend to have more ADD, more attention issues, because we don't have as much blood flow, that is to say as much activity going through our major concentration center. Women and girls tend to have more activity in that concentration center, so they tend to get less attention problems, so they tend to be better at paying attention, quote unquote, when you look across the 6 billion people in the brain spectrum. But one disadvantage that can happen for girls in that is that they will ruminate, and girls and women will often ruminate. They'll concentrate on something for many, many days, and often they will say, oh, why did I just waste 4 days thinking about that? Well, they may not realize that they have a lot of blood flow in this center of the brain. So, of course, it gives them advantages and disadvantages, and all of these things are giving both males and females, depending on where they are on the spectrum, certain advantages and disadvantages. And one of them quickly is this, I just wanted to show you this difference in the inferior parietal lobe, it's called, and this is one of these spatial centers, and that happens to be where it is, where we tend to see that males have more development in that part of the brain that handles those spatials and those visual graphics. And now, so it's larger in men, and this part of the brain estimates time. This is sort of an interesting brain fact. If you test out 100 men and 100 women, you tend to find that the guys estimate time more accurately. It also judges speed, and you tend to find that guys are interested, some guys, obviously not all, but depending on where they are on the spectrum, that judging speed is important. How fast is that going? It also visualizes objects in 3D. And if you think about video games, this is another place where, especially if you have parented at all, or if you're into video games or in that industry, you immediately will think, wow, okay, definitely video games are dominated by males. And so, of course, that's a spatial occupation, playing video games. That's objects moving through space. It just happens to be virtual space. And guys from very young, little baby boys, are already testing better at visualizing where the object will go in 3 dimensions, and then manipulates objects a priori, which means that the brain, in more males, the male brain is visualizing the manipulation of the object before the hands manipulate the object. Now, by the way, we also see this in women who we call bridge brains, women who have more development of these spatial centers, women who are, for instance, architects, women who are, for instance, industrial engineers or mechanical engineers. You tend to see that same thing in them. So once again, males and females, there's no inferiority, superiority. Everyone can be everything, but you do tend to find more of this dominance in guys because we believe it's the testosterone hits that happen in utero, because you see this no matter the culture. Okay, switching to female brain, one thing that folks often don't know is that girls and women have between 15 and 30% more glucose metabolism. That means blood flow in the brain. That means brain activity. And so if you picture in your mind 2 brains, you get an idea of lots going on in a woman's brain and a little less going on in a male brain. Doesn't mean the male isn't as smart. Doesn't mean the woman is smarter. What it means, though, is that women may pick up things that men aren't picking up, because there are so many parts of their brain that are more active at once at a given time. And remember, boys had more gray matter, men have more gray matter, which localizes brain activity so that men and boys are doing an event or an activity in one part of the brain. Well, girls and women have more white matter. And white matter spreads the activity throughout the brain. So that and the 15% more glucose metabolism, those are 2 sides of one coin. That's moving all sorts of stuff around the brain. And so sometimes, women will say, or people will observe, that women pick jobs where they multitask a lot and where they do 3, 4, 5 things at once. And I wonder why. Why did I pick that job? Because it's a stressful job. Why? Well, they may be, or you, if that's you, you may be a woman who has 15 to 30% more blood flow and so much more white matter that really is stimulating for your brain, that you really like doing all these things at once. And that could be one way in which it works for you. What it also does is women will often connect more dots, and especially, I think there are 2 wonderful applications of this if you're looking to have a healthy relationship, I've been married, Gil and I have been married 25 years, and we've talked a lot about this. Both of us are therapists. We both really like this material. And one thing we found in our marriage is there are certain things, in fact, many things, where I just completely trust that she has connected the dots. And a lot of these things are relational things, things in our, with our friends, with our family. I may think something went on. She will say, oh, well, actually, this, and this just went on in this situation, and I'll trust her because she constantly is connecting so many dots that I am not connecting. And that's even with training, that's even with me being a therapist. I still defer quite a bit because I can just see that she's connecting so many of these dots. And one of the reasons that women connect more of these dots is that with more white matter and with other differences in the brain, women pick up facial cues and recognize facial cues really quickly and with more variety than males do. And facial cues are a lot of where nonverbal expression occurs. And as you probably know, somewhere around 70 to 80% of communication, we think, is really nonverbal. Well, if you pick up facial cues better, you're going to pick up a lot of these nonverbal cues better. And so that's a difference that's really important. And as we said, there are more verbal centers in the female brain that cross-communicate. So women and girls are doing their verbals. That is to say, they're thinking in words and they're producing and processing words on both sides of the brain. And so that means they're also connecting. They're connecting and cross-communicating with the sensorial and the emotive centers in the brain more often than most boys and men. So that means they're connecting more words with more of what things felt like, what color they were, how that matched that, and also with what the feelings were that happened in that room. They're connecting more of that with the verbals. And so that goes back to the memory as well, the kind of funny thing we said about how women string memories from 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago quite often. Well, again, here we are. They're not only storing more information 10 to 20 years ago in the sensorial and the emotive centers of the brain than men may be, but they're also now connecting, and they connected more of that to words so that now they can pull that stuff up in words and communicate it. So there's greater internal sensory and emotive experience processed and more of it connected with words. And that's a big deal. I can't tell you as a therapist and as someone who works quite a bit in corporations and in schools, we can't underestimate what a big deal it is that women are processing so much of this, because women quite often are processing a lot of this, and men don't realize that as women are processing it, as women verbalize it, that's really important. And women are getting a lot of their value, their sense of their own value and their own esteem and self by how they process their life experience. And if we dump on that, if we try to shut that off, if we interrupt that constantly, she will feel unvalued. And that is, in terms of health of relationship and health of the workplace, that is a bad thing. Women leave workplaces because they feel unvalued, and they leave marriages because they feel undervalued. And one of the reasons they feel undervalued is that their way of processing the world and of processing the universe and verbalizing it and needing the verbalizing is often not respected and understood. So I believe this is very deep. Another last one we'll look at right here is more corpus callosum activity, thus more crosstalk between hemispheres. And there's a lot of debate about this. The corpus callosum is between the right and the left hemisphere of the brain. It's a bundle of nerves right there and fibers, and there's more connectivity for women and for girls than for boys and men. And this is another reason that there's more signaling that goes between the two hemispheres. And so a lot of these other things we talked about, like white matter and glucose, same thing here with the corpus callosum. There's a lot happening in women's brains that we men often don't realize. So we got to have some humor. And so I got this little slide here for humor. Let's go deeper into gender leadership and keep a sense of humor. So as you can see, and by the way, I want you to know I got this slide from Daniel Amen. I've mentioned him before, and I'm going to show some brain scans that he has shared with us. And he gave me this. And if you don't know his work, Change Your Brain, Change Your Life, and the Amen Solutions, great stuff. He's a neuropsychiatrist who has, he and his group have done 58,000 brain scans. So they have a great deal of data on what's going on in the brain. Well, this is just for fun. And you can see female brain to get to where she wants to go. You see all the red, right? And so now picture men and women in a department store. And, there she is, touching things along the way and looking at this and how does that match and having a very sensorial and emotive experience. And then she finally gets to where she's going. And for the male, he starts at point A and he goes to point B. And he gets what he wants and he leaves. Okay, so that's a, yes, it's a joke, and yes, it won't apply to everybody, but I think it's a nice illustration. And so now, let's look at some scans. On the left is a female brain in a rest state, and on the right is a male brain in a rest state. And as we look at these scans, I'm going to help you see how a lot of what I said now we can look at on a scan. The rest state, by the way, is an easy state, brain state, to scan because all you have to do is let the brains relax. So, you know, scan equipment can be somewhat complex, and so you want to get something that's easy for everyone around the world to be able to do, so you can see if this is true around the world. Do men and boys around the world, do their brains when they go to a rest state, do they look basically blank, as you see on the right of your screen? And do women and girls around the world, when they go to a rest state, so that is to say when they zone out, when they completely relax, do they have all this brain activity that you see on the left of your screen? And in fact, yes. When you kind of lie back and you go into a zone out state, your brain goes into a rest state. This is not sleep, this is a rest state. It's a baseline state for the brain where the brain tries to rest and then it can recharge. And a couple neat ways to think about this is, I'll give you 3 of them that have application across the board. One is if you walk into a school classroom and you look at the boys and the girls there, and let's say the teacher's been talking for like, say, 3 or 4 minutes straight, you may notice that 4 or 5 of the boys their eyelids are starting to twitch a bit and twitter, and they may be kind of starting to look out the window, or their heads may start to droop down, and you can just tell that they're zoning out. And they've stopped taking notes, and they may tap with their pencil or their pen. They may start tapping for a little while to try to keep their brains out of this blank state because they can feel their brains zoning out. They can feel their brains entering this rest state, and they're used to it. They've lived in their own brains for quite a while. They know it's coming, and they want to stay attentive, but you know, the teacher tells them to stop tapping probably, and then they zone and the eyelids start to close. Well, that's this rest state. Another illustration is in meetings at workplaces. When the meeting's gone on for a long time, some of the guys will tap, or they'll start looking in their phones, or their eyelids will start to glaze, or their eyes will start to glaze, and their eyelids will start to kind of semi-shut. They may even actually start to interrupt because they can feel their brains going into this zone-out state. Say, let's get moving, let's move forward. Their brains are hitting this zone-out state. And then a third illustration of this is to think about both, let's say you're in a coupled relationship, male, female, you both have worked a 10-hour workday, and you're both really tired, and your both brains are stressed. And what is it that women tend to like to do when they reconnect with their boyfriend or husband? Women tend to say something like, hey, how was your day? What happened during your day? Because they want to bond verbally. Because look at their brain on the left. Their brains are tired. They've worked a 10-hour workday. But about half of that brain is active. His brain, at the end of that 10-hour workday, most of his brain is blank. So she may not find that he reacts really well to, how was your day? He may say, oh, it was fine. And then, you know, because he loves her and he cares about her, and he may say a few other things, and then he may go turn on the TV. And for about 20 minutes or half hour, he may channel check and channel surf. Or he may go out and get exercise to try to get his brain back awake, or he may go listen to music, or he may just zone out in front of the computer and hit email. Whatever he's doing, it may well be related to this zone-out state, and he may specifically not be able to talk or talk about things that are important or remember things and these sorts of things because his brain has gone pretty blank. And he, of course, has brain activity and sort of in digestion and breathing and, you know, those sorts of centers there that you're seeing. But she's got activity in verbal centers. She's got activity in memory centers, in thinking centers, in feeling centers. And that is a stark example of how different the male and the female brain are. So I'm hoping folks can see that and that makes sense. And if it doesn't, as we do questions, feel free to ask me questions about that. Now, the next slide, I always want to say to folks, because it's real and it's true, that we have to generalize somewhat here, especially in a 1-hour webinar. We have to generalize, but at the same time, we all know that it's a broad spectrum, more than 6 billion. And if you get leadership in the sexes or you get what could he be thinking, I have a test in there that you can take, a survey, and you can try to figure out where you are on the brain spectrum. And here what I've done is I've put in the middle here a male brain that's more toward the female on the brain spectrum. So now as you look at these 3 scans, what you're seeing is the 2 scans you saw before. On the right is the male at the rest state where he has completely zoned out and most of the brain is asleep, quote unquote, though he's not sleeping. On the left, you have typical female brain with lots of activity in the same rest state. She is zoning out but has all that activity. Now in the middle, you have what I call a bridge brain male, and there are bridge brain females as well. I mentioned that before with the spatials. It's harder to scan and find a bridge brain female, and Daniel and Eamon and I have talked a lot about this. Harder to scan that because the female brain is so much more active that it's hard to see the differences. But with males you can, because on the far right you have a male whose brain goes basically blank. But in the middle now we have a male who in a rest state has activity that looks a little more like female brain. Not quite female brain, but looks a little more like female brain. So you have more activity there at the bottom, and then you also have more activity in some of the memory and feeling and thinking centers as well. So I hope that makes sense. Typical male on the right, typical female on the left, the bridge male in the middle. So that would be, so I took my own test, and I'm a 65% male and 35% female on my test. And so I'm not even sure I'd call myself a bridge male, even though I am definitely more toward the bridge of the spectrum than would be a male who you would think of as an action hero. I'm certainly more bridge male than Steven Seagal, let's say, or the characters he plays. But I wouldn't be 50%, male, 50% female, according to this test. That would be a true bridge male. And so you might, that might be a guy who's teaching first grade, for instance, and who's been teaching first grade for 20 years, absolutely loves it. Okay, that would be more of a bridge male, perhaps. And some of us therapists are bridge males, and there can be many other examples of that. And then for females, of course, again, it's hard to scan, but there are many females who will say, oh, I always thought of myself as more male, or a little more male on the spectrum. And they feel it, they know it. They're like, I didn't, when I played the dolls, I took the heads off them, and so on. And so a lot of that is your own personal sort of self-reflection. But if you get those books, those tests, I think you'll find are kind of fun and helpful. All right, so now knowing these differences are interesting, and I've given tip of the iceberg here. There are quite a few more. What do we do with them? Well, I've tried to slip in some takeaways and some little tools along the way about using more graphics and these sorts of things. But let's focus on it a bit before we take questions. Let's focus on some tools and some practical takeaways. So I'm going to do some for women and some for men. So let's say you're learning a lot of this stuff. Well, some things that we've found, we worked quite a long time, about 20 years in various settings, from the corporate to the relationship to the schools. And here are some things that we have found in our research that you can immediately apply. If you're now here, we'll do women first. If you're a woman communicating with men and you're finding that you're having some trouble, one thing to try is to use fewer words. Some guys love a lot of words. A lot of guys, as you can notice, at a certain point zone out on those words and are not tracking them all. And that can just crush communication, because just keep in your mind that brain scan. If that brain of the guy you're talking to goes into that rest state and starts to drift, just remember that he's not going to remember what you said, and he's not going to be able to tell you what it was later, right? Because his brain went blank. The memory centers of those things went basically blank. So I think that's a good metaphorical and literal way to think about it. Another thing, though, is if he squints and frowns while you're talking, don't take that personally. He may just be processing. He may also be zoning out, but he may just be processing what you're saying. it's once his face glazes over that you absolutely want to get concrete and specific and back to the point. But one thing to know about guys is that they are, sometimes when they listen, they're really trying to pay attention, and so they'll squint and they'll frown, and their face will go this way and that way. And quite often women will think, oh, well, he doesn't like me, or he doesn't like what I'm saying. He doesn't believe me. He doesn't believe what I'm saying. When actually he's listening. His face tends to get expressive when he's trying to listen because he's trying to listen really carefully. So there's really two takeaways there, and they have to do with the stage you're in the communication. If you know you're communicating well and you're on target, the squinting and the frowning may be nothing. It may actually be good. It means he's attentive. If, however, you've gone on for a while and his face glazes over, then that's the stage at which you really probably want to worry. Another thing for women is de-emphasize saying sorry, sorry, and asking open-ended questions. This is especially important actually in the workplace. Everyone develops their own rhythm in their home relationship. The application of this in a relationship at home, boyfriend or husband, that application would be if constantly you, the woman, are on the bottom end of a communication. And if you're always saying sorry, 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 and he's never doing it, then that's a pattern that could well hurt you, hurt that marriage, and it's not your fault. It's no one's fault. It's just a pattern that needs to end. And one clue that she's always at the bottom end of this is that she's constantly saying sorry, sorry. At work, similarly, if you as a woman are constantly saying sorry, sorry, and constantly saying that's right, isn't it, or what do you think? If you're constantly doing that, then you are actually participating in you being devalued. And this is really important to say because men do bring a lot of testosterone. They bring a lot of competition, and especially the more male they are. And for them, people have to show their strength to be respected. And actually, that's not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing because life is very competitive and business is very competitive. So in the home, we would rather that guys are not like this. And I'm constantly trying to train guys not to apply in the home what they apply at work. At work, especially though, this is a takeaway for women because at work, that's a very competitive environment, and we don't want to expect these very male guys who are running the companies, we don't want to expect them to change on this because they won't. They expect strength. So, and they respect strength and they will promote strength. So this is just something I really always beg women when I do women's leadership conferences and corporations. I'm begging women to take this seriously and look at this behavior and support each other and get mentoring in not doing this if you are doing this, so that you don't always feel undervalued. Okay, a couple others: increase use of graphics and visuals. This is really important. I said it for classrooms. It's for meetings too. The guys need a lot of graphics quite often. And appropriate jokes. Okay, I'm circling back, as you notice, in a number of these. We think that there's some research that the cerebellum, which is the doing center where guys have so much more activity, there's also some research showing that that gets stimulated by jokes. And we think that's maybe one reason that guys rely on jokes a lot, because they're a shorthand communication and they create laughter and they can create bonding. And so if you're losing guys, reawaken them by telling some jokes. And obviously you will please have to decide what's appropriate and what's not. I'm not saying to tell inappropriate jokes, but to be involved in creating humor, because that really wins men over. And then last thing on this is allow physical stand-up, move around, go out opportunities. And if guys are falling asleep on you or brain dead on you, let them squeeze things in their, squeeze balls. Let them toss things in the air. Let them move around. Because now that you've seen those brain scans, now you can see that a lot of this is in the brain. This is not something guys are doing that's bad. This is the way the brain is. And so it has advantages and disadvantages. Okay, now for men communicating with women, the mantra is interrupt less, listen more. This is just so big, and I hope guys are looking at those brain scans and seeing how much activity the female brain has. 15 to 30% more activity, so much more quite often going on in 5 or 6 different areas and regions, and a lot of what she needs is to be heard, to be listened to, and she needs us to not interrupt. And so the more we can work on that, the better life will be. And in fitting with Building Strength webinars, the more healthy we will be. Trust me on that. The more healthy relationships will be if we guys can interrupt less and listen more. Another thing we need to do is we really need to ask everyone in a meeting or in our relationship, what is your take on this? So that we make sure every voice is heard and every woman's voice is heard. What is your take? What do you think? What do you believe? What's your experience shown? What does this mean to you? It isn't communication without a response, so we got to make sure that we're getting a response. And if we're monologuing, and I know I am monologuing now for this hour, but if we're in a relationship and we're monologuing, then it's not communication, and there's going to be trouble later because we're not really communicating. We need to balance processing with goals. Guys tend to be very goal-oriented, but we got to allow the processing. And we have to remember that as women process, a number of things happen in their brains that connect dots. And this is something really big for leadership teams that we talk to them about. You know, it's sometimes through the processing that you actually reach the design innovation or the new invention because we're having that conversation. So we have to balance goal setting with processing and let the processing happen. Listen for the gem or the kernel in a long speech. So anyone can apply this. I've put this with men communicating with women because quite often men will say she's talking for too long. But obviously men can talk for too long. So this can be either side. If someone is talking for too long, listen for the gem or the kernel. What I mean by that is that core, that gem that came through. And you often know this gem because the person who is speaking circles back to it. So they talk for 2 or 3 minutes about something, and then they repeat it as they start the next 2 to 3 minutes of their monologue. It's that repeated piece that is quite often the gem or the kernel. And that's the thing to paraphrase back, especially when you're at about 3 minutes and they've started repeating it again. Okay, here is where one can safely say, oh, can I stop you there? I just want to make sure I got it. Is this what you're saying? And then you paraphrase it back. And that can work very well. She feels heard, and the monologue doesn't go on for 3 or 6 or 9 minutes so that everyone in the meeting is lost. And again, by the way, men can monologue too, so please apply that across. It's very important for us as men to look for introverted women and ask them for their specialized knowledge. So this is a way to bring out women in a meeting or even in our relationship at home who they're just not saying much. Well, what is their specialized knowledge? What is it that is their talent set? What is it that they're really good at that we know they really know well? Specifically ask them about that. It's not enough to just say, okay, have we heard from everyone? Give it about 3 seconds and then go, okay, meeting's over. There are some women and there are some men who you really do need to draw them out, and it'll be a huge advantage. So ask for their specialized knowledge. And the last thing is, this is about facial cues. If you're on negotiating teams, this is big. If you can, make sure to have women involved, high-quality women who are high up on your team or in anything that you're doing. Great to have a gender balance because women will generally pick up more facial cues in a negotiation. So at the end of the day, when you're debriefing what happened in that negotiation, women will generally pick up more cues, and they're able to give insight that quite often the male negotiator doesn't have. And as you apply culture to this, it's really important because quite often there are a lot of people in various cultures, especially in Asian cultures, who work very hard to show no facial cues during negotiations. And that's part of how they were raised. So it's especially important to have women who are really good at reading facial cues. All right, so as you can see, tip of the iceberg, and I'm hoping that I've tantalized you a little with all sorts of interesting insights, and that you want to go deeper into this because it really is an amazing field. And what I would like to do is I would like to stop and let you ask questions. So do you think that's a good idea right now, David?
Absolutely, absolutely. This has been fascinating, absolutely fascinating. Oh my goodness. Thank you so much, Michael. Thank you so much.
Absolutely, and you can see I'm going through, I could go on for hours and hours, but tell me how we should do the questions.
Well, usually folks type in the questions and then I read them out as they come in. So folks, go ahead, it's question and answer time. So go ahead and type in the questions, and I have a couple of questions myself. I probably will start the ball rolling. And what is fascinating about this is, Michael, I mean, people stayed on the exact number, stayed on it did not move a bit the entire period. Just, I mean, that's unusual. People come in and go out, but apparently you just held everyone's attention. This is fascinating.
Oh, thank you. I'm so glad it's useful. Thank you.
And Michael and Daniel Amen actually sent me an email saying you will love Michael. He does a great job, and he wasn't kidding.
Oh, sweet. Say hi to Daniel.
Okay, I mean, and as you've been talking, I've been like, oh my goodness, so this is what's been going on. Because I mean, I work with Sherry, like, you know, Sherry is more extroverted, and I'm more of an introvert. And when we're working on our business, and obviously we're doing something that pretty much hasn't been done before, and obviously there's a lot of stress and a lot of misunderstanding that can go on. And when there are high pressure situations or stressful situations, I tend to cave in and just become a lot less communicative. And Sherry is the complete opposite. She wants to talk more and more, and that itself causes extra stress because I'm not talking, and she wants to process things more. And I realize that, well, that is certainly an issue that needs to be worked on, and helps us to understand better how our brains work, especially from the female perspective and the male perspective.
Yeah, and actually, and I can add another piece to that. The biochemistry, you know, when men get under stress, our testosterone levels go up, and that is an aggression chemical. And so sometimes that can manifest in men interrupting more and being more aggressive when they're under stress. It can also, it's a fight or flight. It can also make us withdraw.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but when women get under stress, their oxytocin level shoots up, and oxytocin is a bonding chemical. So you have two sexes here, both of whom are under the same stress, and one, the male, gets an aggression chemical, a fight or flight chemical that rises in response to the stress hormone.
Uh-huh.
And the other, the woman, gets a bonding chemical that rises in response to the stress hormone. So women may quite often be trying to bond more in order to relieve the stress, and men may tend to become more aggressive, or they may withdraw. And this is, you know, it's deep because it has to do with relationships as well, with close, you know, marriages and familial relationships as well as workplace.
Oh, wow. That I've never heard that before. I have never heard that before, especially the oxytocin, the bonding thing, going up when people are under stress. Wow, that explains a lot.
Yeah, we think this. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say we think this is a result of so many years, you know, about 1 million years of human development, and where women needed to bond more because they were working closely with their kids or with others in villages, and men were out hunting until about 10,000 years ago. So the belief is that for most of human history, males needed to get more aggressive when they got under stress, not less.
Right.
And females needed to get more bonding when they were under stress. So even if this theory is wrong, it's still a good metaphor for trying to understand why this happens, because this happens all over the world. Female oxytocin goes up, male testosterone goes up.
Interesting. Interesting. Okay, here are some questions. As a woman,
go ahead.
As a woman, how do you handle a work situation where male leadership does not give the woman an air or validation, almost like blowing them off? I know you mentioned that.
Yeah. Well, now the first thing to do, the first thing I suggest you doing is get leadership in the sexes, because it briefs you. It gives you a language as a woman, and it gives you a language that men can understand, because it's a totally gender neutral. It's male positive and female positive. So it can be used by men to help women understand them. It can be used by women to help men understand them, and it gives everyone a common language that's based in science. And the good thing about that is that quite often in workplaces, the men are data and science driven. They'll believe that better than they'll believe someone that they consider touchy-feely, you know, and I'm just repeating language I've heard so many times from guys. So that can help brief you. And in that are a number of tools for helping women communicate better and helping women promote themselves better and so on. And of course, those are all listed there, so I couldn't go through them all. But I'll tell you about tool 5. The 5th one has to do with mentoring. And one of the most important things for women to do in this situation is to reach out to not just other women, but also a couple men who are in the hierarchy and in the system, and reach out to them and say, okay, this is how I'm feeling, and I need to check this with you. I need to see, okay, does this make sense? Here's how it's happening, and be specific about where it's happening. When I relate to Joe, Joe does such and such, and I feel such and such. So it's really important to be concrete to make this case with people that you want to mentor you, either as peer mentors or as mentors up in the hierarchy. So that's one I'll highlight right now, is that mentoring and setting it concretely. But there are many, many more tools in Leadership in the Sexes that you can use. Use them in community. Use them with 2 or 3 other people so that you're not completely alone.
They should probably buy the book for her boss as well, in a tactful way, maybe a birthday present or something, so that they, and our coworkers, so they can read it, or highlight some parts and just have them read the parts, so they don't have to read the whole book or something like that.
Yeah, most men are not chauvinists anymore. They just don't get it. If she's feeling this way, there are some chauvinists still. There's absolutely some chauvinists still in the workplace. But I got to say, from doing a lot of this, that actually a lot of it is that the guy doesn't even realize there's a problem. But he himself is not a chauvinist. Okay, so I'm gonna throw that out there and say that my experience is that maybe 10 to 20% of this going on in workplaces is pure chauvinism. But most of the chauvinists are retiring or leaving. And so what we have is a new, just guys, but they still don't get it because it has not been explained to them in a way that makes sense, brain-wise or data-wise for them. So yes, I think that's something you can do. Of course, he might get offended. He might think, oh, you think there's something wrong with me. So that's why I always suggest read it and then start the process with 2 or 3 other people and then develop a plan.
Right, right. Now, is this book also in an audiobook form that people can listen to in their cars as they go along, things like that?
Well, actually, Soundview did a. I was honored in that it was they put it as one of the top 30 books of the year, and so therefore they put a bunch of it on audio. And so if one goes to Soundview, there is a partial audio tape there. I don't believe the whole book has been put on audio tape, but I've listened to that audio tape. In fact, I was on a flight on Alaska, and Alaska Airlines flying from, I had to speak in Hawaii, and I was flying from Seattle to Honolulu, and I went through the thing they give out, and there was Leadership in the Sexes. So if you're on Alaska Airlines, it's in your thing there, and it was on audio. So it does exist on Amazon. Any of those places, one can get that piece of it on audio.
Awesome, awesome. And in your seminars on this topic, how long do they last? How many sessions do you go through?
Well, in some, sometimes they'll just say, well, let's have a keynote. It's just maybe 2 hours or 3 hours. But sometimes it can be longer. And we've done 1-day, 2-day, also webinars. All sorts of different modalities for doing this. So that would depend on the needs, and then train the trainers in corporations. And there's a whole way it's done. And that's on if you go to michaelgurian.com, just click the corporate, and it takes you to that site. So it can be anything from the keynote all the way through to creating something for the corporation that's longer term.
Awesome, and I think we should have quite a few people on the webinar who probably are in that position where they can hire you or get you on to come speak to their staff, because I think this is so important that it will help significantly to improve on the bottom line when men and women are better able to work with themselves. So.
Yes, we have found that. There's a chapter in Leadership in the Sexes that reports like Deloitte and Touche and IBM and the programs where they instituted this kind of thing, and you do see a bottom line result. You do see that a significant, like Deloitte and Touche was estimating $190 million they were saving per year because they were retaining women. And remember, what happens generally is women quit. Women they don't feel valued, they don't feel understood, but the company has spent $100,000 training them, and then 2 or 3 years later the women leave. And of course some men can leave too, right? I mean, we want to retain talent on both sides, but we see almost an epidemic quite often of women leaving. And so that's why there's so many women's leadership conferences, and we're trying so hard to help with this because, you know, like Deloitte was, you know, that's almost $200 million they were saving and not losing that $100,000 per woman who leaves.
Right, right.
So it does affect the bottom line. Yeah.
Wow, absolutely. Okay, Amy has a question. You mentioned that women can ruminate on a situation for hours or days due to the increased blood flow in the concentration center. Because this may affect relationships, is there a way to train the female brain to ruminate less or just let it go, so to speak? This should be a man's question.
Oh, yeah, this is big. I'm going to give 2 applications of this. One is, I'm the father of 2 daughters, and so my daughters are grown now, but this was really big in our home because they would, a friend, let's say Andrea, would not call them back or would not text them back, or and then they would see Andrea the next day, and Andrea would kind of look past them. And you know, one of my daughters would ruminate on that for days, that Andrea hated her. And this really feels bad to her. And this is quite often with girls, you know, they want to be in. They don't want to be out. They want a connection. They want the bond. They don't understand why the person doesn't like them, and so on. And the ruminating goes on. And of course, the ruminating can actually affect the relationship, because then they go take revenge on Andrea, when in fact Andrea was, you know, in her own zone somewhere. She just forgot, or whatever it was. So there is real danger, and a lot of girl drama, what we call girl drama. I have a lot about this in The Wonder of Girls. That can happen because girls are ruminating. Now, sometimes they're absolutely wronged and they're bullied, and that's terrible. And we're not talking about that right now. That is its own thing. But we're talking about this rumination. And this can also happen in the workplace, where a woman may feel she's been slighted or something, and spend a lot of days on it and start gossiping and start saying mean things about someone. And in fact, not a lot had happened there. So the first thing I'm begging girls and women to do is I'm begging them to think about the word danger. So when they're ruminating on something, have they been put in danger? So ask, I'm just going to call myself Michelle now. I'm Michelle. I have gotten angry about something, and I'm ruminating about it. I need to ask myself, okay, wait a minute. Have I been put in danger by what that person did or by what that person said? Is there danger to me? And the reason that's important is that we believe some of this rumination that girls and women do was actually a protective, that you know, they were doing this to protect themselves. I'm talking now about the million years of human history. Well, how does this stuff happen in the brain? It comes from somewhere. So what was functional about it? Well, what was functional about it is she was protecting herself. She was thinking things out to see where her enemies were. And that may have been carried forward to now, and so that now she's doing that. So that's why the word danger is important. I'm saying to her, okay, if you're, so I'm Michelle. Oh, wait a minute, no. What Gabrielle said to me was not dangerous to me. It ticked me off, but it was not dangerous. Okay, so let me back off. Okay, it was not dangerous. It just made me angry. Okay, what made me angry about it? Here's what made me angry about it. And then I decide, okay, is it worth my going and talking to Gabrielle? Or, since I'm in no danger, should I let it go? Is it worth me going and talking to my friend Judy about it? If so, yes, let me go talk to Judy about it, because it made me angry. I want to ventilate. I want to talk to her. But I'm not going to do anything about it. I'm not going to try to get back at Gabrielle, and I'm, in fact, not going to respond to Gabrielle, because I'm not in danger. So that's one, obviously, you know, there's many, many things we teach on that, but that's one that is a quick takeaway we can do over the air. Think of the word danger.
Got it. But then again, Michael, you are kind of assuming that we are rational, reasoning, logical beings, aren't you?
Well, if the question that's being asked is, what do I do, then I have to appeal to rationality, because I believe that the person wants to do something. And so what I would ask the person to do is see if there's danger or not, and then reach into a community and get the help one needs. Yes, at the very very moment that we're doing things, we are in a state of, of anger. At the moment this thing happens, we're angry. But when Amy is talking about rumination, okay, that's the anger actually has dissipated, and we're keeping it alive by ruminating. So that is actually an opportunity. A day or two later is an opportunity to bring the rational mind in and say, well, okay, what exactly happened here? And this is big for relationships, because quite often, so now I'm talking about a marital or romantic relationships, quite often, women will ruminate on something that their partner did, but he will have no idea what has gone on, because he did not put her in danger, or he did not feel he put her in danger, and in fact, he doesn't get it. He doesn't know. And she'll say, well, you did such and such, and he'll go, oh, really? Oh, okay, sorry, and he won't even know. So it is really important, I think, if the woman is ruminating, to check with reality, see if she was put in danger, see if the person was trying to endanger her, and if it's a day or two later, I think that's not hard to do.
Okay, okay, gotcha. That makes sense. Thanks for clarifying that. Okay, I know you have to leave soon, and I'm going to bring up this interesting question. I believe I'm a bridge female, as I enjoy more male activities, but with the busy mind of a female. And my boyfriend is a bridge male who enjoys male activities, but has the busy mind of a female and loves to communicate. Wow, interesting. Could the balance between the minds be the reason why we seem to get along extremely well and our communications seem to last for hours? Have you ever heard this kind of situation before, Michael?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Is there any information in there about how long they've been together?
Georgia, you might want to type that really quickly, okay? She didn't say it, but Georgia, go ahead and type. Oh, she said 6 months. 6 months.
Okay, 6 months. Okay, so let me say a number of things. I will say really quickly, though, that a book that they will love is What Could He Be Thinking? Because each chapter takes the opposite. It shows the bridge brain. And so I think they would love that, and that would be more than I can do in these few minutes. But I can say a couple things. One is that they may well be right that they're both bridge brains, and the test in What Could He Be Thinking they could take and see. Also, though, the reason I asked about the time is that in the first 6 months to 2 years of a relationship, because of the pheromones and the oxytocin and all these chemicals that are shooting through our systems, and they're shooting through our systems not only because we love each other, but also because we're having a lot of sex. And sex creates lots of hormone biology in these first 6 months to 2 years of a relationship. So some of what we experience, like at 6 months, where we feel like we're completely united and we're these wonderful complementary bridge brains, some of that is chemical. And if we look at 2 years, so 2 years or later of the relationship, if we look at that, it may look different. So the word is may there. It may not, but it may. And that's why that 6 months is important. I have, however, yes, absolutely. There are a lot of bridge brain women and a lot of bridge brain men in the world. And I almost want to say apologetically to them that in the hour we have tonight, I'm having to generalize, in this hour. But I am totally aware of how wonderful can be the bond between bridge brain females and bridge brain males, and those can last for years and years.
Yes, indeed.
Should we take maybe 2 more questions?
Sure. Okay. Now, Robbie wants to know I'm not sure if this is part of your experience, but what factors change with menopause and andropause? As people get older, do the kinds of things you're talking about, does that change?
Yes, many things happen. Your basic brain type, I mean, unless you get a brain disease like Alzheimer's or something, that's not going to change too much. You're going to look back and say, well, this is sort of who I've been. But because your brain chemistry, so that's your hormones, because those change, you can see what appear to be a lot of changes in males and females. So I'm going to give a quick few. One is that females can often become more independent. So women who were more female on the brain spectrum, according to our work here, when they get past menopause, it appears that they have higher testosterone. in other words, they become more independent, more alpha, more assertive. And that's something that quite often happens. And we believe that some of that is because now some of the hormone biology, the estrogen and the hormone biology, is no longer in play. For males in andropause, testosterone, obviously, to stay with this, the hormones, testosterone is really big. As male testosterone goes down, a couple things can happen. And one is counterintuitive. People would say, well, if your aggression chemical is going down, why are you getting angry so much? Right? Because intuitively you would think, oh, your aggression chemical went down, you shouldn't be getting angry as much. But in fact, for a lot of men, as we go through andropause, our testosterone goes down, and it makes us quite irritable. And it makes us angry. And there are a lot of reasons for that. We don't perform as well now in the world. We don't have as much confidence. We're not winning as much. I mean, it can be all of those things that make us angry. But it can also just be the chemistry, that our brain chemistry is now somewhat awry to where it was before because we don't have as much of the testosterone shooting through the system. And then, of course, another result of lowered testosterone is that you do often become less aggressive. You want to push the world less. You become less socially ambitious. And you can even, obviously you can have lower sex drive and so on. So yes, there are a number of things that happen.
Right. Interesting. Oh, there's so many things to consider, aren't there? It's just amazing, all these different things. I mean, the more we do these webinars, the more we realize, oh, well, this is important, and that is important, and we need to get more of it, more information here and there. And I really hope, Michael, and I thank you again for this, I really hope we can get you on to touch on the other aspects that you're so good at as we go along. So thank you again for joining us with these webinars, to do this webinar tonight.
Oh, thank you. It's a great opportunity. Thanks so much for having me, David.
Oh, we appreciate you. We appreciate it. And I'm going to keep bugging you until you change your phone or something for more webinars.
Oh, okay.
And again, thank you to Gail, your wife, who has really helped to set this up for us. Folks,
yes, she's my boss. She's the office manager, and so that means she's my boss. I love it.
That's great. That's great. Folks, Michael's presentation will be available, the recording of, and we'll probably turn it into an MP3 so you can listen to it in your car as well. And the slides, we've already received requests by email for the handouts. We will not give you the slides, not at all, but we will make the handouts available, and again, that's at a nominal fee. Be sure to contact Michael. Go to his website, www.michaelgurian.com. I know there are some of you who are listening in and cannot see the slide, so be sure to go to Michael Gurian, and that's GURIAN.com. What else do we want to say tonight? Yes, please learn how to relate better to your spouses and the people of the opposite sex. There's a lot that hangs on that as well. Michael, any final words?
Well, I'm going to ask you, if you don't mind, to thank Sherry. I did not myself interact with Sherry, but I see her name here, and you've mentioned her, so I know she's there doing a lot. So, Sherry, thank you so much as well.
Absolutely, I'll send it to her. Yeah, she's the one in the background doing all the technology and making this whole thing happen. Keeping us straight.
Well, keeping us there. Well, thank you to her, and thank you to you and to everyone who listened. Many thanks for caring about this topic.
Thank you. All right. Well, folks, that wraps up for tonight. Have a great evening, and we will be sure to let you know about the upcoming webinars next week and next month. God bless. Have a great evening. Good night.